You're listening to The Sisters Strain, with another round of our Care to Share series, leading to the screening of our upcoming documentary, The Coalition, on May 16th. We're going to dive a little deeper with 5 of Chatham-Kent's anti-human trafficking coalition members. Each will share about the service organization they operate here in CK, the ways in which they are seeing gender-based violence and human trafficking play out in our community, and the resources they offer survivors of these crimes. Now, a few of these ladies will have an extra bonus as they interviewed with us on topics for our other films, Unhoused, Communities in Crisis, and This Women's Work. So you'll be hearing about how their work is affected by the housing crisis and also their thoughts and experiences as women in the working world. We left that all in because extra information is always a good thing. The only way we can create lasting change is by uniting together and becoming informed. So follow along and, of course, care to share.
Being part of the coalition has given me an opportunity to really connect to community partners and for us to bring forward the issue of human trafficking that's happening within our community and even in the province, and what can we do together. I just happened to come onto that table. I was actually replacing somebody else, and then I fell in love with the table, in love with the people on it, and what this mission was about, and what we're trying to do. And so that's why I'm on it, but also too why I'm on it as a personal piece is this is my passion in life, is to help people, to support community and clients, and so this is just another way that I can do that besides the other parts of my job.
Okay, so let's just get right into it. If you could set, working in this day to day, I think a lot of people in the community aren't aware human trafficking is as prevalent or don't really understand what it is or how it's actually happening here. Could you tell us a little bit about how you're seeing human trafficking happening in our community?
So I think a lot of people perhaps might think what it looks like based off Hollywood movies. And although that can happen, it is quite different in Chatham. It tends to be more covert. It tends to be more kind of looking like everyday people walking through their everyday life. And in fact, this is going on behind the scenes. Oftentimes what we hear from clients is they refer to their traffickers as their boyfriends or their fiancés. They don't see them as traffickers. It's usually someone that's groomed them and is close to them, and they consider them their boyfriend. And sometimes, quite often when we talk to clients, they don't recognize the signs of human trafficking, of what's happening to them. They don't recognize those signs, but we do. So it can just look like everyday people walking down the street. Perhaps they're going to school. They could be even going to work. So that is more often the case in Chatham. We do have cases where it is more dangerous and more severe in terms of being held captive somewhere. That does happen. I don't want to say it doesn't, but it's more just kind of everyday women and men, of course, but mostly women that you wouldn't realize is happening to.
When it comes to the younger generation, could you expand on how you're seeing it manifest for youth?
We're seeing it happening to younger, of course, through social media, right? They are groomed through social media. Or if they are vulnerable, they are coming from a very vulnerable situation. We're seeing it that way. It could be that these children have run away from home, or they do have some additional struggles at home that has kind of left them a bit more isolated, and then they might connect to somebody, and then they become groomed. It doesn't happen overnight. It's usually a process that happens, and usually it could be a very younger person, youth that, an older person they meet, and I'll help you, I'll support you, like you don't have to go home to that home anymore, and that's usually kind of how it starts.
Could you tell us some of the signs that like a parent or someone could look out for, things that people could notice to say, oh, I might be suspicious about what's happening here?
The biggest sign would be, especially in a younger youth who wouldn't be able to work, is if they start collecting things like, how did you get that? Where did that come from? You don't where would you have had the money to get that, right? Especially if they're under the ages where they can even legally work. So it could be the grooming piece would be that trafficker will buy them presents and pay for things. And so you might see, inside your child's room items where that come from, or it could be, it could be very questionable clothing of, I think one person had mentioned it was a youth, and the conversation was they went into the closet and they found lingerie for the youth. Like, where would that come from? Expensive purses, perfumes, makeup, things like that. Things that a youth may not be able to buy themselves, but they suddenly have it. The other signs you may see is like the I don't want it's not the classic, but you would see signs of withdrawal or change of attitudes and behaviors, maybe more aggressive, maybe a bit more defiant, or it could be the opposite, more withdrawn, depressed, sadness. You could see bruises, like marks on a body that where did that come from? They don't tell you. Could also look like kind of being on their phone a lot more so than usual. It could be questionable conversations and text messages.
And could you tell us a little bit about the sort of sextortion that's happening for young boys?
So young boys are getting connected to people online, typically oftentimes through gaming or other particular social media apps, and the grooming would be kind of similar to females in that usually they're wanting these boys to send them nude photos. So it starts off small, hey, send me a picture of this, and then it's like, well, no, send me more, and it could be somebody on the other end who's posing as a child, youth of the same age, so that even with both girls and boys, those messages they think they're talking to somebody their age, and they're not. It is someone older. So usually for boys, it's more the progression of showing photos, and then it could also then start turning into threats, right? So oftentimes with human trafficking, it may start off as romantic or a friend or something, and then it shifts into violence or threats of violence, threats of hurting your family, threats of making you disappear, threats of hurting your pets or your friends, whatever is going to be that thing that keeps them there. It then will eventually turn into threats of violence, and then most likely will actually turn into violence as well.
So they take some time to get to know
Yes.
you, know your weak points of
Exactly.
who your family is, what you care about, what your fears are.
Exactly. Then they
use
play
that
on that.
against you. And could you explain how that ties into young men then, or sorry, explain that it's not always sex related, but more drug.
Yes, and so we have had a couple of those situations where it's actually drug trafficking. So they'll groom them into drugs. Doesn't always necessarily mean that victim will become addicted or that they are forced to use drugs. Usually it could just be that you are going to do this, and there's the love bombing. It could be that's usually kind of that first red flag of the love bombing, and we're not talking about that love bombing that you might see in other situations of like the narcissist or something like that. This is someone very specific for that goal of trafficking. So the love bombing, especially, that's why they like to the focus is on somebody who's vulnerable, because the idea is you want that so much, right? Like, what do we always want? We want that connection as humans. So they play off that, and the love bombing would be like filling that cup, and then as it's progressing, it's like, well, I've done this for you, you can do this for me, right? And then as it keeps going, then that's where you start seeing the more coercion and more force, more violence, right? Because at that point it's almost like they can't get out of it.
So how do you, or rather victim services in general, how do you when these victims are coming to, what does that look like in terms of your response to what you're able to offer, what services you're able to kind of provide those individuals? What does that look like?
So when we get connected to somebody, oftentimes it does take a bit of time when you're working with a client for the stuff to come out, right? Because they could present to us, maybe sometimes through the hospital or through the women's center, they could be presenting to us initially at first as intimate partner violence or presenting as sexual assault or a serious assault. And then once you start talking, you start hearing the little things of, oh, then we realize this is something more. And so at that point, when when we start doing the assessments, because we also consider if there's any substance use issues that is often associated with human trafficking, not always, but can be often. So, we have had some clients who they actually didn't have any concerns with substance use. They actually were being drugged before it would happen. So they would be forced to drink something that had roofies in it, right? And then they would pass out for a day, 2 days, and then they wake up. And so it's not always the case, but when you start connecting some of the dots of like, oh, there's some concerns around substance use, and oh, you've been forced to do this stuff, you've been forced to do this, like you've been forced into sex acts for in order to maintain your substance use disorder. Are you, is somebody getting money from you doing these things? And when they start the yes, then it's like, okay, this is something bigger. There's more involved here. So when we realized that we were working with a client who's been the victim of human trafficking, so a lot of our services, the first thing is we try to help them get out, right? And that could look like getting them somewhere, like some accommodations to the women's center. It could be, we'll do safety planning, we'll get them stabilized with basic necessities and groceries. We'll also connect them to counseling. We do have within our program, we can send them to treatment. So there's funding for treatment, whether they need to go to an actual place that focuses on human trafficking, or they need to go to a substance use residential facility. We can take care of that. We could take care of transportation, anything that is basically going to help them get out, ideally be safe and be able to put their life back together.
Could you tell us about some of the barriers in your work that come up with someone specifically trying to remove themselves from human trafficking? Like, a lot of people think, oh, that's a terrible thing, but okay, you can get out and move on, but I'm sure it's a lot more difficult than that.
It's such as like with inter-partner violence, it is a cycle. So it does usually take somebody who's a victim of human trafficking to leave about 8 times. I think 7 to 8 times is the norm. Oftentimes it could be that depending how long they've been in that situation, they may have very little life skills. So to suddenly be out of that and then be on your own, not knowing kind of where to start, how to get your life back together. So sometimes they fall back into it. Sometimes what happens is they do get out and their traffickers find them, pull them back in, and quite forcefully. Sometimes it does involve violence to get them pulled back in. It could be that they have substance use addictions, and so they might have to be then kind of go back to their trafficker because that's their source, right? It's complex, so that every victim is unique in terms of like what is pulling them back and what's gonna keep them out. So what's good about our services is that it is not a one time only. If we help you and something happens and you fall back into human trafficking, or you're coerced back into it, that's okay. We can do it all over again and try to help you get out all over again.
I was curious, and maybe you aren't aware of this, but do you see like a generational relation to human trafficking? Like, do you? It's like substance abuse disorder or alcoholism can often be like, oh, if the parent was like if they weren't able to kind of find their way out, it happens to find its way to the next generation. Have you seen a relation in that generationally with human trafficking, or the kind of just?
I think what's really important to know about human trafficking is it can happen to anybody. Yes, generally speaking, those that are more vulnerable or marginalized oppressed could absolutely be what might have a higher rate, or people who have, there might be a family history, generational, absolutely. However, it can happen to anybody, and that's what's scary, is it can happen to anybody, and unfortunately, in some circumstances, it is actually family members that are trafficking their child. So, which if then sometimes if you sit back and you hear the history, it could have been that they were trafficked, right? Or there were other issues within the household. But there are cases in which the actual parent is trafficking their child.
Is there any, while protecting privacies, but anything that as human trafficking has become more prominent and, maybe at one point we didn't really recognize it in our community to where we are now, any experiences you've had with dealing with this where you were genuinely just shocked and appalled by what the capabilities of people?
I think the ones that took me back were when it was a family member that did it, right? That was tough. As a parent, that's tough to hear. Yeah.
Working with these different service organizations about COVID and how COVID really affected a lot of people, but I think it's a broader look at the economy too. Of there's a lot of people living in really desperate times right now that feel really hopeless and aren't sure of how to provide for their family. And so you hear those stories of a family member trafficking one of their own family members, and you want to think in your head, that person must have felt so desperate, that was the easy or only way they felt, wasn't able to provide for themselves, and maybe even some of the victims who find themselves in trafficking, they feel like that is the only feasible existence for themselves at that time.
Yeah.
How do we provide more hope for those individuals, or more change in our communities or societies to tell people that that's not the only option, kind of thing,
I think, I mean the awareness, what you're doing here, what we're doing with the HT Coalition is, that education, helping people see the signs, right? So that people know that there's help available. But also knowing that, there are people that care and want and do this, every day, that we're here for you. The other organizations are here, and being able to offer what's so important is a trauma-informed perspective. Every approach to every client we have in this organization, whether it doesn't matter what tragedy or crime type we're dealing with, we come from a very trauma-informed perspective. We come from a very genuine, unconditional positive regard for that client to get better, to do what they need to get to those next steps to be better. So knowing that each organization, for the most part, has a trauma-informed perspective, so we understand the complexities of why a parent might have resorted to that, or why a person would stay in that situation. We understand those complexities, and we're not here to judge. We're here to say, here's what we can do to help you. Please use us as you need us. So
I think that really lends into the shame or the stigma piece surrounding it, with most things that carry stigmas or shame of we can't make change through shame. We can only make change through love. So
Absolutely.
as, family members, as community members, as organizations, it's operating out of that lens of how do we take some of the shame away? How do we take the stigma away so people don't feel afraid to look for resources to change their situation?
Yeah. And we're always open for just if you're not ready. So for me, I very much live by that, meet the client where they're at. So if you're not ready, we can still have the conversation. So when you are, here I am. When you are, here I am, right? So it's important that we are meeting the clients where they're at, because with anything, trying to leave or trying to change, it's a lot of complex steps, and it's might be one step forward, 3 back. Absolutely, we are here for all the steps of wherever you need to be. That's where we're at. So
this is difficult work. I'm sure working with people who are experiencing intimate partner violence or human trafficking, they're in the lowest place of their life, right? So I imagine there's a lot of beautiful moments when you're able to really help someone get that upswing and figure themselves out. What do you do in those low moments when, there have to be moments that feel the opposite of that?
I mean, there's always the self-care piece for yourself when you are those low moments. The best thing is to um, have that self-awareness of when those low moments come, and also understand it's important for us that, like, or for me at least, that I respect people's autonomy and, their free will, and respect that. And if they're not ready right now, or let's say we get so far and then they go MIA because the trafficker got a hold of them, right? And again, knowing that they're most likely were coerced back through violence, through threats, possibly through addiction. That you did everything you can, and hopefully they'll come back to you knowing that we'll do it all over again. So that's how I get through those low moments, is that I'm here no matter what. When you're ready, here I am.
I guess, like, when we look forward to the future, and everyone gets up and does this work because they hope for better and they hope for changes, whether that's again, small changes within a family, small changes in an individual, changes within a community, or like the society at large. What's your kind of hope for the future in this work that you're doing?
I mean, would I love it to stop? Obviously, I wish I didn't need a job. Like, I wish I didn't have to be here. That this wasn't going on, whether it's this or into partner violence. So what I would love to see is certainly not only on the individual level, but on, a community level and a system level and whatnot, that there are more resources, more outreach, more funding put into it, so that, more help can be provided. I know that in multiple tables, we've had discussions about, you know, community organizations that are working with youth are also there, and we're trying to tap into the youth to try to kind of make those changes early on so that they can see the signs themselves, right? Because it can be very easy to miss, and then sometimes when you realize what's happening, you're so deep in it, right? And to get out is even that much harder. So my hope is that we're not just looking at that change on the individual community systems level. It is almost a generational change where it stops. And then obviously a huge component now, which I wouldn't have had as younger, but now the younger generation, is that access to social media. It is a huge method for traffickers to connect to youth and children.
Is there anything about your work when it comes to intimate partner violence or human trafficking, information or education that you wish the community knew or understood better, or any myths that you've heard that you wish you could dispel?
I think what the community needs, what would benefit the community is knowing how often this happens. It's an epidemic, right? Like, especially intimate partner violence, and how much it's happening, and understanding the signs, understanding the symptoms, get involved. You see something happening, get involved, because that could make that difference, right? We try to hide this stuff. We don't want to talk about it, or like you had mentioned earlier about, like, removing the shame and the guilt, as opposed to, like, let's put in hope instead, right? And non-judgmental approaches, trauma-informed approaches. The community needs to know that this is happening, and it's increasing. Since I've started here, it has just increased, right? And what can the community do? That's what the community needs to know.
I guess, yeah, we asked warning signs of human trafficking, but, as someone who might have a friend or a mother or a sister, or, out in the community, what are some, like, we're going to speak to the fathers in Sault Ste. Marie next week about their daughters who were murdered from femicide. Like, what are some of the things you think people miss or don't think about, or like, what are some of the signs for intimate partner violence that could lead to femicide that maybe we're brushing off or not taking seriously?
I think some of this, I mean, your signs, like, of course, there's always, like, depression, withdrawal, isolation, of course, if there's like the bruising and all that. A risk factor too is looking at, you know, uh, access to means, access to weapons, access, is it a family that have guns in the home, right? Is there a history of interpartner violence in either one of them, of their own families, right? There could be some risk factors. What services have they utilized? What haven't they utilized? So if the signs would be, have you tried to do it? Have you left before, and how did that go? Is there stalking behavior? So looking at all those little pieces will give you kind of that bigger picture of what's going on. And then, being able to have an open conversation and say, is this happening at home? Can we get you out?
I was thinking about that because I feel like we've talked with the fathers or whatever, other people have said, like this and this, and I wish I would have said something or done something. And you work with victims so often that I think, what if you are someone, like, say I have a friend and I'm concerned that this may be happening. How best to approach that person? Like, do you come right out and be like, is this happening to you?
You can.
Or
I think that's challenging because like every relationship is unique and has the nuances. But I think it's the same thing when it comes to certain things. It's an awkward conversation to have. So I think recognizing in yourself it is a very awkward conversation and feels uncomfortable, and that's okay. But I think sometimes just being very straightforward. This is what I've noticed in you. Are you safe at home? Right? Is everything okay? We can look at how to get you help. We don't have to do it overnight, but we can put the steps in place. Part of our role here at Victim Services is not just helping after an incident has happened. It's helping people escape, whether it's interpartner violence or human trafficking. It is putting a plan in place to escape safely. And that can be done with anybody, right? The tools are out there, right? The information's out there. So sometimes has to just be that direct. I am concerned for your safety. I want to help. What's our next step? And that person not feeling alone, knowing that there's others to support, makes a difference.
For sure. I think we underestimate the power of like manipulation and coercion as well with these, of like, well,
It's not always physical.
How did they find themselves in there? Or like, how did my child, how were they so silly enough to get wrapped into that? Or like, why didn't they just leave, and it's like, it's never as easy as that.
Yeah. And oftentimes it starts as, like you said, that love bombing earlier, right? It starts as you're playing into whatever that child, that youth, that person needs, right? You find their vulnerability and you play on that. And then you build, the trafficker will build from there. And then there's a point at which it turns to threats of violence, and then it will turn to violence and threats against family members, and threats against you owe me this debt, so just you do this for a little while and your debt's paid off and I'll let you go, right? There's no debt to pay off, right? It's the way to keep them there.
I also think something you mentioned briefly about like the role that we all play and the responsibility of it, that obviously you don't want to like get into someone else's business, and it's a very often a thing you hear from men, and men kind of stepping out and not getting involved in things. But I think anyone, right, of like, we all know we see something that's suspicious, or we have that feeling in our gut, or we're unsure, and we're very afraid to have the question or to approach that conversation that feels uncomfortable. But we all do have a responsibility to the people that we know and love, and also the people that we maybe don't know, but we see and we witness things, to put ourselves out there a little bit and come forward and like play that part that needs to be played in communities to make that change.
Yeah, it is an uncomfortable conversation. It's challenging because you don't want to offend. You're always worried about offending somebody, right? But I think we need to remember that if somebody feels seen and heard, they're not going to be offended. They're going to be relieved, right? So if something's going on with me and somebody says, "Hey, Sarah, you know what, you're really quiet today. Are you okay?" It opens the door for the conversation. And I think that that's what we have to remember. By bringing up the situation or what you're seeing, it is making it okay for that person to say, "Oh, I can talk about it. This is a safe space to talk," right? When it's ignored, it's not encouraged to talk about. But when it's presented of, "Hey, I'm seeing this in you. I'm concerned," And often too, what's challenging is that even when you open the space to talk about it, it is challenging because of the fear of leaving, whether it's into partner violence or human trafficking, the fear of leaving because the consequences are so severe that it's still that you had asked about the barrier. That is a huge barrier of, if I leave, it's going to be much worse. If I leave, I'm going to be killed. If I leave, my family will be killed, or my pet's going to be killed, right? So, even opening up that conversation, that fear will still be there of, oh, do I really say something? Because it could put me at risk. It could put others at risk too.
I think the fear for anyone also, like starting over.
Where
am I going to live? What am I going to eat? What is that? I'm not qualified for a job. Like any number of those things of like, what does that, or if you have children or someone else dependent on you, like what does that look like for all of you?
Exactly. It's challenging for and even the best of circumstances to sometimes reset your life, right? But for those in these situations, exactly spot on. Like it's almost like there's more unknown questions, so it's easier to stay in the known piece, right? Even if the known is, or they'll, the fear that they're going to be worse off, right? At least here they can predict it. They know what to expect. Whereas that, and again, depending on how long they've been in it, right? It's going to be create even that bigger fear of the unknown. And how do I get out of this? Oh my God, how am I going to live this life?
When it comes to intimate partner violence, I imagine the process can be so long to leave, and also, and maybe you can verify this or not, like I imagine perpetrators present so differently to everyone else compared to how they do at home. So one, it would be hard to see the signs because they seem like such an incredible person. But then also I imagine the victim would question themselves to be like, maybe it is just me. He's so nice to they're so nice to everybody else, but terrible to me. So it must be me.
Well, gaslighting is a huge coercive tactic, right? So, but yes, definitely you see, what's the first thing you see when sometimes you find out that something has been happening? You go to their Facebook, and it's all happy pictures, right? Because people want to portray this happy family, or, oh, I had no idea that person was like that. Definitely they'll show a completely different side of them in their friends and family, in the public and work and whatnot, as opposed to what they are like when they're at home, right? And that can be very isolating as well, because someone might feel they're not going to believe me that this is happening because they think that person is fantastic. They're not going to believe me. I'm going to seem like the crazy one, right? So that's another barrier too, is they fear they're not going to be believed.
Thank you for listening to another episode of The Sister Strain.